Hello, everyone. This is Marita, one who catches lightning, with the Path of Ish podcast, Walking with Our Shadow, where we share ancient indigenous teachings of remembrance, all so we can walk and learn how to walk a path of radical self-love. Hello, everyone. I know it's been more than a weekend since we last opened this circle. And the reason is that I have lost my funding. And so this offering of sitting here weekly is something that I no longer will be able to offer. I want to thank those of you who have decided to become patrons. And I thank you for your generosity and how you are giving what you can. I'm not sure how this circle will continue or grow and change and evolve, as capacity always changes depending on situations, as well as capability. So I have for you 4 last episodes that have been planned, and beyond that, I'm not sure where the road leads. I am hoping that all of you who listen out there and who have said and explained or told me that you listen to things 4 or 5 times find it possible to become a patron. Whether it is a small offering, know that any offerings are truly valued. I want to thank all of you who have shared this podcast and spread this medicine. And thank you for that. And asking if you also have the capacity and capability to become a patron, please do so. I have been taking time to record this. The conditions of my life have changed. And so sometimes we need time. Today, what we will be welcoming into the circle is really this idea of cultural exchange, the idea of immediacy, that word value, as well as protocol. So let us begin. And today, let's begin with just a way to listen. And so begin by listening to the sounds outside of your room, or if you are outside, the sounds far away. Now listen to the sounds inside of your room or those sounds closer to you. Now let's listen to the sound of your breath and to your heartbeat. And as you settle in to your biosphere, I want you to take a pause and recognize that your biosphere, which includes the sounds far away, close to you, and your breath, that means your biosphere involves a greater biosphere. It involves nature. So many times, what I have discovered that even in teaching indigenous spiritual practices to Western people, they still have this idea that their biosphere is singular. They still, when they take their 3 breaths, are only taking them for themselves, not remembering that to breathe is as important to the biosphere around you, the plant kingdom, that receives your breath. Breathing is not a singular act, nor is living on this planet. Not even if you live on an island. Are you a creature who lives in isolation? You do not exist in a void. And so let us take our 3 breaths now, knowing that our breath is about connecting, not to just the singular intelligence of our mind, the singular intelligence of our body, the singular intelligence of our essence, but understanding that each has its own biosphere. What is its biological, emotional, bacterial? You are not a void. So let us take our breath in and out through the nose. Welcome our beautiful mind into this time, into this place, this atmosphere of our mind, this biosphere. In and out through the nose, welcoming our body, this biosphere, this atmosphere into this time, into this place. In and out through the nose, welcoming the atmosphere, the biosphere of our essence. And again, in this cultural exchange that we're having, remember, it's a cultural exchange, meaning that the words that I use, even though they might seem similar to you, are not. Even if I use terms like social justice or decolonization or anything like that, or even peace and prosperity or value, they will have a different definition, weight, or way of beingness as you enter into this circle. The reason that I'm pausing so much to try to continue to explain things in this dialogue and even in this centering meditation, which does not mean the absence of teaching, is to present in your mind that this, again, even though we are offering these teachings through modern technology that give you access, it does not mean that we are speaking the same language or that Your access to listening will be an access to understanding. Access does not mean understanding. Many times people believe that, or believe that because of you've had an exchange with someone that you are similar. And if you've been listening to this podcast, many of the things that we talk about here is how to hold differences, how to hold our emotional being, be responsible for it, and be responsible then for how we affect the other environments of interacting with other beings on this planet, including humans. So today will be a time in the circle of defining and redefining things. For I do not know when I will have this opportunity again. So let us first, as we welcomed ourselves, welcome the East, the South, the West, and the North in its own intelligence and beingness, to hold us in this circle. Not a circle to understand, to grasp and to know, but in our circle of not needing to know, but to still be compassionate. Compassionate with what we know, what we do not know, and not forcing upon others our system of beliefs or structures, including what many of you call a value system. And that's where I'd like to begin. I did a podcast early on called Creating Value. I highly recommend you go listen to that. Today, though, I want to explore how many times we use that word. And we do. Value system. These are my values. This is how I value being received. This is a very Western way of speaking. Because the West is always looking to be valued in and of themselves and in exchanges. We don't use the term value when we are in an exchange and it is reciprocal. We call it a good exchange. This is not the good of Christianity, of good and bad. It is good that it was equal. When I have exchanges with people outside of my circle, they use very different language bases, even though we might be speaking, quote unquote, the same language as in English or Spanish or other. And many people, when you find against that commonality, another podcast I did of how to find the uncommon ground, not the common ground. In that exchange of similar sounding syllables and consonants, you believe that the way that we exist is the same. The the West, one of the wounds is that wound of value, of trying to find value, to be valuable in circles, to be valuable to others. And it shows up in many ways. It shows up in people giving you advice you did not ask for, people not honoring your no or your boundaries. It shows up in an exchange of cultural exchange where there are very much misses. And interactions that are seen in very different lenses. And I know many of you have probably read that 4 Agreement book, which means the first one, do not take things personally. That is an indigenous practice. Whenever you are in these circles, that means whenever you are speaking to me, if we ever have an exchange, remember we are having a cultural exchange. We are not the same. And that is okay. When you speak to me, you have value because you are a creature of the planet. Whether our exchange is equitable or good is very different. And that is neither here nor there. Because in these circles, we believe in real free will and choice and sovereignty. Which means you do not tell people who they are. Which means you are aware of the cultural context that you might be bringing to the table. And know that things take time. One of the reasons that I use the term slow medicine and have been for quite some time about these circles is that also means our exchanges will be slow. I have been in exchange with teachers over 10, 20 years. And sometimes it takes them 20 years to answer one question that I started with. It takes 20 years because it takes that time for you to answer your own question and to take accountability for really what are you asking. As I've said before many times, people actually don't ask questions, or they say they're curious, but they're not. That is why in these circles we use the term agenda. Everyone and everything out there in nature has an agenda. When we recognize that, we can come to exchanges not with quote unquote value sets because you are valuable, but with conditions. Now, people in the West don't like that term, conditions. Conditions are just the reality of boundaries. Conditions is accepting that you have an agenda, that many times we exist, we have agendas. An agenda for many Westerners is a very difficult word to sit with. Because it has been determined that to have an agenda is a bad thing. An agenda is just your right to be. And how you go about that. Now, your right to be, whether in relationship or not, could clash with someone else's right to be because you exist and live with different conditions. Those conditions can be cultural, societal, biological, emotional, and the list goes on. So in these circles, in these classes, in these conversations, in these podcasts, in personal exchanges with indigenous people, or more specifically, within these circles at the Path of Ish, we unravel, we redefine words, and we realize that many times questions, even questions, have an agenda of an answer. And as my teachers say, never go to a teacher that has all the answers, because they have stopped being the question. I said being the question. Yet the West values people who have the answers. You might value yourself for having the answers. You might value yourself for being able to freely give advice. But that might not be a good exchange for others. That might be a crossing of boundaries. And that might be an overextension of yourself. My father always told me nothing in this life, Rita, is free. And he was right. There is always exchange, whether unagreed upon or unagreed upon exchange, that would be considered valuable, or to use the terms that we use in this circle, good. A good, an equal exchange, or an unequal exchange. From there, you determine if you want to continue exchanging with this other person, this other situation, or this other circle. I have people that come and leave and come and go from my circles, that step in deeper and step out, and we are not attached to it. Everyone retains their value because everyone is a creature of Mother Earth. I heard from a student recently is the correct word. And they said that when they began my classes, they had a lot to say. And now, the more that they do the work that was taught for them, the less they have to say. The less sure they are, the less need they have to fill up space, the less need they feel that they have to quote unquote give value to a situation. And again, please go listen to that Creating Value podcast. That means that you are actively, literally determining a value on something. And again, in indigenous circles, we believe everything and everyone has inherent value. What you do throughout your life is learn then how to give back. What you learn then is how to be full of gratitude that you are a creature of Mother Earth in relationship with the all. So yes, these circles are different. Exchanges in these circles are different. Words are different. We define even essence differently. We define peace differently, value, exchanges, so many things. Good, bad, right, wrong, light, heavy. It is different. Time is different. Urgency is different. What I tell some people when you enter into conversation with me or when you enter into a circle, you are on native ground. Think of it like you need a passport to come in. You're in a different country. You're in a different way. Every exchange is culturally different. And that is okay. And that means there will be misunderstandings. That means there will be clashes of culture. But I come from a culture where you can hold that, where it is expected. Because we expect people to have conditions and agendas. We expect and understand that humans, as creatures, have the largest, most vocal agendas and conditions than many other species. And that when they don't recognize that they have agendas or that their conditions are not met, humans are some of the most violent beings to be in relationship with. That's why when I tell my students, who I consider students, those who are in my circles, when they ask me, Marita, what else are you going to teach me? Why am I here? That whole, what is my purpose of my life? What do I need to learn next? I don't tell them it's not a tip or a trick or a tool. You need to learn about you. The greatest thing any being on this planet can do is learn who they are and how they operate. And learn how unique it is to that individual, to that being in relation to the all. To know how you operate emotionally, to know your genetics and the conditioning of your genetics, to know how you operate biologically, to know how when your different biospheres interact, you have this universe that is you, that is constantly interacting, and each of our systems, right, have agendas and conditions to thrive, to grow, to exist, to be healthy. And when those conditions aren't met, we are off balance. When you do not get enough sleep, when you do not get enough water, when you compensate with that with stimulants, it affects your nervous system, and with some people more so than with others. There is no norm out there. Not everyone is the same. I have conversations with my sister, who is in the medical field and will always share my medical questions or tests. And they always say, well, you have to understand, Marita, that within the norm, as your doctor is telling you, might not be within your norm. And I say, that's what I tell them all the time. What I have learned that I have to do in having exchanges with doctors in the Western field is I have to quantify and qualify my answers. Just simply, what is your pain level on a scale of 0 to 10? And I said, I have to ask them, what do you mean by that? Please qualify it for me. Because my 2 could be someone's 10. Because of my tolerance level, where I have been taught to hold great amount of pain, others might not be able to. So please qualify this. And then I have to explain to them what that means. I have a high pain tolerance, and I qualify it now by saying I was a rower in college in a Division I school, where during a race, a 6K race, I broke my ribs at 2K and kept rowing and carried that boat when we were done. Just the minute I tell them I'm a rower, people ask me if I'm a marathoner because of my endurance. They understand that. And when I tell them that next level story, then they understand more that maybe my 2 is someone else's 11. Taking time to explain to people the conditions of what it takes you to live and to thrive or to not is important. Yet many times we live on assumptions that we are all the same and have the same conditions and place upon, I'm going to use this very carefully, place upon exchanges with certain amount of value. See, you place it. You determine it. That is a Western way. And so, as we continue this cultural exchange, we understand that the importance and the richness of having cultural exchanges is to be uncomfortable, to not know. You don't come into an indigenous circle being Western because you know. You come because you are curious or because the way of the West you have found to be lacking. You have found the conditions of living in that society to not fit the conditions that you need to thrive. You have determined that the agenda of colonialism, consumerism, do not fit for you. And that does not mean that you don't come with equal exchange. We do exchange in these circles. Time, energy, money. It's very basic. And when you enter into these circles of slow medicine, where I have students who have studied very intensely with me for 4 or 5 years, which means they have probably learned 20 years of teachings, say to me, I'm barely scratching the surface. It's taken me 4 years, 5 years to unravel my conditioning that has kept me from starting to explore the depths and the possibilities of deep relationship. Now, again, these circles, and myself included, are not human-centric circles. My exchanges with my students many times are about plants and rocks and sticks and wind and fire. We rarely talk about human exchanges. When I'm asked questions, I always go to nature to find examples of exchanges or potentials. My teachers do the same, even if I come to them with questions about how to exchange with humans, which I find very challenging. They will direct me to the natural kingdoms. And they will remind me, Marita, you are dealing with someone outside of your culture. Actually, they don't use that name. They use my real name. It is so important to allow each other the grace to exist and to thrive. And what the world is seeing right now, and what humans have quite a challenge with, is this idea of agendas, conditioning, and value. When we don't recognize cultural exchanges, we dehumanize. And I must say that we even have to play with that word, humane, but we'll save that for another time. Because inherent in that, we have to realize that we are no greater or lesser than any being, and that our potential of humane includes violence. And violence doesn't have to mean bombs or physical, but it can happen even in simple exchanges. In conversation, in emails, in texts, and voice messages. Many times, unintentionally, specifically when you do not realize that we are all in cultural exchanges with each other. Even when I speak to my sister, I know I'm in a cultural exchange with her. Because of our age difference, she grew up in a different family than I did, with very different agendas and very different conditions. And we speak about that. We speak about how crazy it is that we have the same quote unquote blood, yet we grew up in very different ecosystems. And so when I speak to my own blood family, we hold this. We hold our differences, and we are very different from each other. Yet, we still come to the table to exchange. And sometimes those exchanges are equitable, and sometimes they are not. Sometimes we ask a question, and we know it will take the other a very long time to answer. And we understand that sometimes that does not fit into someone else's urgency. And that urgency could be real, or it could be based on the conditions of their life at that time, or the conditions of their culture. And I say culture because my sisters who are younger grew up in a very different culture than I did. This podcast today is an invitation not of understanding and grasping, but of being present to exchanges, to cultural exchanges, to protocol. We haven't even gotten into that. And why we as humans seek exchanges outside of our own cultures to answer different questions because the conditions of the culture that you might be in do not meet your needs. And so, in that, stepping outside of your culture, you must recognize that you will not know how to interact. And that is such a gift of grace that you can give yourself and to others. The grace of not knowing, the grace of not taking things personally, the grace of what it means to be a good relation. And as my friend Angel Deer said, it is hard to be a good relation. And good does not mean right. It does not mean pleasant. Many times you can be a good relation in an equitable exchange, and still you are not meeting the conditions that that other person needs or that other creature needs in that exchange. And so we must realize our differences, our capacity, our capability, and that sometimes what we have is not what someone else needs. Sometimes our knowledge and our wisdom is what someone else does not need. I'm a wisdom carrier. Some people ask me a lot of questions, and many times I make them ask themselves even more questions. To be a wisdom carrier is not to know the answer or the absolute answer. It's to always be the question. My invitation to you in these exchanges that we have here or in other circles is to come with the abundance of true indigenous humility. You are no greater or lesser than any other being. The freedom of true humility is to accept your inherent value, which then allows you to start exploring your conditions. And sometimes these circles will meet your conditions, and sometimes they will not. And that's fine. Many times I do not meet people's conditions, and that is fine. I am not here to wage a war on the West, on Western culture, or any of that. I'm here to be rooted and planted in my traditions and the ways that I have been taught, and the woven ways that I have learned and continue to learn as I continue to grow, change, evolve. And that means my capacity and capability fluctuates at times. For I am still human. So I welcome you to sit with your humanity and the conditions of what it means to be human. Biological, emotional, and so forth. Knowing that we don't have to understand each other to have compassion. And so, as I have been taught here in Hawaii. Let us go on in a good way. And so I will ask forgiveness if I have harmed you in any way or my people have, in any of our exchanges, intentionally or unintentionally. And so I forgive you in all the ways that you have harmed me and my people, intentionally or unintentionally. And so we cut and we buoy back up. And we do so that future generations do not have to be in this exchange, be in this fight. And so we recognize our differences and know that they are good. I thank Kumu Ramsey for teaching me that. I thank all my teachers for teaching me ways. And I hope that you find the teachers who will continue to allow you space to question yourself. And the way that I've been taught is my teachers are many times very silent. And so I thank you for being in the circle with me and for the exchanges and the cultural exchanges that we've had, for the ability to recognize our differences and still come with compassion. I hope to see you in a circle soon. And maybe if we get the funding, this podcast will continue. But we are far, far from the goal. We are probably 1/100th from what is needed. But still, I'm so grateful. You can also join me on Substack, where there's longer pieces of writing. And listen to all the other podcast episodes that were recorded. Again, thank you for the generosity of your time, for coming to the table and holding discomfort, for being ready to explore, to redefine, to stay truly curious. Curiosity has no agenda. Truly curious. To welcome the unknown. And to recognize that differences are what make us beautiful. I thank all who have held this circle and all my ancestors. I thank the east, the south, the west, and the north, those guardians above, below, and on this plane. Should I? Once again, it is with deepest gratitude that I bow to you for joining me on this podcast, this episode, this circle, this plática, this meditation, this remembering. I hope that you have stayed curious. I hope to see you in the circle again next week. So make sure that you like or follow. Until then, may you be blessed with abundance of peace and radical self-love.